I was before I got into product development, I started off as a 3D artist, but um, my first job actually when I joined the ZBrush development team back in 2010, I sort of like started off as the sort of like the janitor approach. Like you just start off at the lowest possible place. I wasn't doing anything that I wanted to do, but they needed a media person to kind of help them capture events, doing camera work, capturing images, videos, cutting things together, what they called UGMs back in the day, user group meetings, which are basically just like live streams now.
Yeah.
The
The live
standard.
streams before they were cool.
That was before the YouTube live thing kind of really took off and when everybody started streaming. So I was doing a lot of editing, doing a lot of show reel editing.
Yeah.
One of the coolest things I got to do was editing podcasts and all that stuff is really fun when you kind of get into the rhythm of like,
Right.
paying attention to what people are saying and cutting something at the right point to kind of put emphasis on things is great. But for ZBrush, it was fun because we got to do like every year we would do a show reel, and I was creating those for a few years actually, where I get to take all the movies that ZBrush and games that ZBrush was involved in
Oh,
making
nice.
and just make a trailer for ZBrush, and it was
That's
just
awesome.
all the cool stuff you saw in movies and games, and I loved it and got to cut it up with music, and I really enjoy editing as just like a hobby.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely fun. It's very time consuming. That's what I find. And like before I started doing any of these like YouTube videos or anything, I like watched a bunch of videos about like how to make YouTube videos. And so a lot of them are talking about, editing, and I know a lot of people don't like editing. So I'm lucky that I do enjoy it. But like the one thing that everyone says is like, the more you do it, the faster you'll get at it. So, it takes you maybe at the beginning, it'll take you a week to edit a video. By the time once you get into the
Yeah,
rhythm, you could be doing it in a couple hours. So yeah, it's just
totally.
like anything, like just kind of learning and mastering the
For
skill,
sure. 100%.
So yeah. Was ZBrush your first job? Is that like where you started?
Well, it was, I guess, no, it was I am really crazy with jobs. I mean, in terms of like jobs, my first job when I was growing up, my dad was a faux entrepreneur. Like I grew up in a small town in Michigan, and he just kind of like he he owned all kinds of random things. He owned a couple apartments. He bought a dance club that he ran for a little while. We owned a batting cage and miniature golf course in our hometown, and so my first job was like collecting rent from like the local apartments and helping him clean up all the trash and stuff around, and then working the mini golf and batting cages. I was like
Yeah.
9 years old,
Yeah.
and yeah, I can't tell you how many times like Child Protective Services was called because there was this little kid that was like handling all the money and fixing the machines and sweeping the greens. People comes like, "Where's the parental supervision?" I was just like very self-serving in my own way. I
Yeah.
just kind of got right into working. So I
Yeah.
have had so many random jobs, but 3D related or tech industry related. Um, after I was at Michigan State, or I had enrolled in Michigan State art program, fine arts program. I had 2 years under my belt in animation at Lansing Community College, and I transferred to Michigan State. And over that period, I just got this weird feeling. I started using ZBrush and Maya in high school. I was really lucky. My local community college had this like one. I went. We had this intercollegiate program where you could do half of your high school sessions, junior and senior year, at the local college, and you could
Oh,
take like
nice.
specialist program classes. Like art was one of them. They had a comic book artist that was there teaching people just fine arts and comic book style art. So I went for that, and there was this guy that was there that was just a tinkerer. He was in the background, like running a PC Windows desktop with like Maya and ZBrush and Unreal Engine.
Yeah.
And I had been doing my comic book stuff for like 2 months, and then I would like any chance I would get, I would go talk to this guy, just look at what he was doing. He was 3D printing back then. It was like
Wow.
2001 or two.
Wow.
So it was rare for me to see. I didn't know anything about this stuff, and
This
this
guy's
guy
really ahead of
kind
the
of
curve.
introduced me to it. Yeah, totally. So fast forward, that kind of like sparked my interest in it, and that was when Pixar and animation and visual effects was really kind of that was like Star Wars Episode One era of VFX, where like the green screen really became a powerful tool, and everybody could see it. And I was like, this is something that I can do, and I'm early. I was
Yeah.
always worried about just being an artist. My dad was not a supporter of art. He was
Hmm.
very against me doing anything art related. So of course I rebelled and wanted to be an artist. And
Were you always
but
artistic? Like, were you always drawing and sketching and, or not even so
definitely.
much?
Yep,
Yeah.
I started really young, first, second grade. I noticed I had maybe a bit of an aptitude for sketching and drawing, but it was just something that I felt that I was good at, compared to my peers. People would like, I remember being in band class and uh, all the other students would see like my Dragon Ball Z art and they would ask me to like colorize their art and do their stuff. And it just kind of turned into a thing. But then eventually that kind of rolled into digital arts. And then I started learning Photoshop and ZBrush and Maya and all these other things. And fast forward to college and I got to Michigan State and I felt like if I was going to do this, I'm not going to get anywhere if I stay here in this island of, this
Yeah.
place that wasn't, it was a great university and, would have been a great program for me to be a part of their fine arts program, but it just didn't feel like it was going to be what I wanted.
Yeah.
So I dropped out and I transferred to a film school in LA and got a quick additional 2-year degree with them to kind of, speed myself up and mostly just to kind of like what you're doing here and wanting to talk to artists and learn more. I just wanted to be surrounded by it because I
Yeah.
felt like it was the only way I know how to learn is like, I just need to put myself in that environment and do it. And that's kind of how I got started. So my first job was like, I was taking anything,
Yeah.
living in LA as a digital artist. I knew compositing, I knew character modeling, I knew animation, a little bit of rigging. I had did some like I remember doing a fashion show, some visual effects with a couple of friends for a fashion show that was good. It was like I think it was in Beijing, somewhere in China. It was a Burberry fashion show, and we were doing all these like particle effects for people walking on the runway and little
Hmm.
jobs like that. But my first official full time thing was with Pixelogic ZBrush, as I mentioned with media, and that's really how I got started.
Wow. So that was your first like real uh 3D design sort of exposure in terms of like career wise.
Definitely. Yep. I
Wow.
had been thrown some gigs to like build characters for, little one-off projects, just freelance contract work. But when I was offered the position with ZBrush, I had always been, as I mentioned, I started using ZBrush in, my junior year in high school. I had
Yeah.
my desktop down in my room and I would just tinker with Maya and
Wow.
ZBrush. My first character model was Kratos from God of War, the first game. When that came out, that was like legendary.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah,
Wait, so
it all kind
how
of
did
snowballed from there.
how did the industry change like from then to now, like, from what you've seen? 'Cause I'm sure you've seen. That's what. How long ago was this that you like were starting in Zebra in
That was
Pixelogic at the time?
2001, 2002 when I started.
So that's over
Um,
20 years. I mean, the industry's changed a lot in 20 years.
it very much has. It has. I mean, those days, I go back to the high school days. I started learning how to model first in Maya, and it was literally, at least the direction that I was kind of following at the time was like, if you want to make a character model, like you want to sculpt a face, Maya didn't have sculpting tools, and I'm not sure where Mudbox was at the time. I know Mudbox was definitely around and very popular, but ZBrush was kind of known as the thing. But anyways, I was, using a plane and just pushing vertex points around with the
Yeah.
camera locked, on the front orthographic view and just like snapping it to a picture in the
Yeah.
background. And then I got ZBrush and it was like, oh my gosh, I can like push this stuff around with my mouse. And I was using a mouse at the time, like sculpting, but
Yeah.
even that was a million times better.
Right.
Um, and so those days, that was before Dynamesh in ZBrush. That was before like all these like revolutionary like model making tools that came out to make it more fluid.
What version was
Um,
that? Is it like version 2?
it was 3 point, I'm trying to remember the names for that one. It's 3.5, I think was a popular one. It was like 3.5 R3 was kind of a big groundbreaking. I believe that was the version. It's a groundbreaking version compared to previous iterations that a lot of the famous ZBrushers had been using before that. Before that, it was like a lot of 2.5D artists, uh, I wanted to say Gert Milas, but there's a couple artists that are coming to mind. I can't remember names, but anyways, the 3.5 R3 was a big version. Then 4 was really the big game changer when Dynamesh and all these other things started
Mm.
coming out, where it was like, okay, this is a real kit bashing tool that made it, you know, it just skyrocketed after that. It
Yeah.
really exploded. So I was very fortunate to be there right when that transition was happening. And I got to be a part of all those changes that were happening in the industry as well, with just how many 3D artists were being utilized. I kind of look at it as like it was a renaissance of 3D art in that era,
Yeah.
because before that, when I had just started getting into it, 2001-ish, 2002, that, you know, if you look at the industry, it had been transitioning from practical effects to digital for some time. And,
Yeah.
you know, digital hadn't really like broken in all areas. Like you had seen some films that really showed the power in, you know, just good examples would be like Jurassic Park, was one of them, where you actually have like real CG animated assets and characters that are, you know, in this case, you know, creatures and dinosaurs that are moving around and look photorealistic. It was
Right.
like, that's not something you had seen before. And Star Wars Episode 1 was one of those things that really showed the power of it, but it was such a tremendously expensive thing to do, in order to achieve that. So they used it minimally. And then all of a sudden, I'm coming into the industry, and now everybody is using visual effects for everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of when that whole, you know, the opinion, there's a very large opinion that CG, you know, makes it destroys movies. You know, it makes
Right.
movies, you know, I guess more watered down. But I think it's all about how you use it. You know, it's all
Yeah.
about how these things are put into place. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
It's interesting, just on that point. It's like I see this like criticism a lot. And I don't know like what the reasoning behind it. It might just be as simple as like budgeting, but it's funny because like in some ways like some of the CG from like let's say like the early 2010s like looks and holds up better than the stuff that they're putting out now. I don't know if that's just because like now they're just like trying to pump it out as fast as possible and as cheap as possible. Versus back
totally.
then, like it was expensive. So it's like if you're gonna do it, like you're gonna do it right. You know, like you want
Yep.
it to look good and like it's just it's kind of funny that like the easier it's gotten to make VFX, the worse the quality's gotten. But like I guess
Yeah.
that's kind of the nature of the beast, you know, like
It's a good point, and I've thought about this a lot. I've talked about this a lot. I feel I have good reason to believe in the way that I've observed it over the years is it's just about volume, really. When you think
right.
about the amount of content that was getting pumped out, you know, that was coming out back then. If you look at like the 90s was when it really started, the Jurassic Park era, that like kind of was the proving ground. And then a lot of other great films did come out and showed great power with VFX. I'll go back to Star Wars Episode 1 being one that like actually did a good probably 50-50. I don't know what the ratio is, but there was quite a lot of CG shots in that film next to a lot of practical effects. They were still doing
Yeah.
miniatures. They were still doing some really cool like usage of CG and, you know, practical effects and sets and miniatures combined that kind of seamlessly put it all together in a way that felt, you know, it felt
Yeah.
exciting and you know, amazing, and it saved them a little bit on the budget too when they're using
Right.
practical.
Right.
But then once you know the potentials for profit comes into play, this is where it gets a little trickier, and this isn't a criticism, it's really just an objective observation of like it's as much a business as it is a creative platform. You know, it's like
Right.
everybody
Right.
has creative ideas, but the potential for profit needs to, you know, be considered. And so a lot of companies started ramping up their VFX production pipelines and putting a lot more into it because they can do all these things that we could never do before. And that's really exciting. But over time, just naturally as humans, I think this is just how it goes. We're always evolving and changing. So you can't ever stick to one thing for too long, as
Right.
much as it's like, it's the old thing is like, as we get older, we start to become more curmudgeon, and like, you know, we don't we don't
Right.
want things to change because we kind of like we've had our fill. But the younger generation does want things to change. They want
Right.
new, you know, they
Right.
want to push it, they want to put their stamp on it, and so it
Yeah.
keeps evolving. So it's just kind of steamrolled into like so much content is getting pumped out, which does water it down a bit. It just makes it less valuable, the VFX side of things.
Yeah.
But you do get those great pillars like the Jurassic Park still come out. It's like I look at in terms of VFX, I mean, you look at Dune or,
Yeah.
you know, Blade Runner 2049 or, you know, all the big, you know, the Interstellars, the, you know,
Right.
they put the emphasis and the time and the energy and the money into that stuff that matters, but not everybody can do that. You know,
Right.
that's just the reality of it.
But then it's unfortunate because like you have like so much volume that you have to like sift through so much garbage now to find the really good ones. You know, it's like it's kind of a shame. You know, like
It's true.
yeah. For me, like I personally, I've always been this way. I always preferred practical effects over visual effects. Like
Yeah.
I've always loved miniatures and special effects makeup. First of all, I think it looks better on the screen. Like I
Hmm.
think it's 9 times out of 10. You know, it holds up better in the long run. You know, like whatever the classic is, you look back at Lord of the Rings. You know, like it still holds up to this day because majority of it is practical effects, right? And
Right.
then the one, and I don't know if it's only, but like the big visual effects, with Gollum slash Smeagol, like, and that was revolutionary. That like I remember it's in the Guinness Book of World Records. Is like I don't remember what the record
Yeah.
was, but like that was so beyond kind of what was being done.
Yep.
But I just like you could tell when something's like practical versus like a CGI effect, and like I know Guillermo del Toro. I know he loves to stick with practical effects.
Yep.
Like he has there's a Netflix show. It's called Cabinet of Curiosities. I
I
don't know if you've ever
did
seen
watch
it.
it.
Yeah,
Yep.
and so it's interesting because like each episode it's like an anthology, and each episode is a different director that he I guess mentored or critiqued. I don't know exactly the exact process, but I found it really interesting that you could see that these directors were very much influenced by him, and a lot of their stuff is also practical effects. And
Yeah.
so maybe it's not as flashy, and like maybe you're not doing as cool things as you would be doing with if you were to use visual effects, but I think the quality of product that you're putting out is just so much better, and it
Totally.
also it requires like more love that you have to put into it. Like you're doing it for the love of the craft. That
Yeah.
everything about it just like shines through a lot better, and that's just
It definitely. I mostly agree. I think it can for sure. It's like I've come to feel there's certain things that work really well with practical, and for me, some things that don't. Like the Dark Crystal is a good one in like the practical world, where like they intentionally Netflix kind of took they captured or they were aware enough of the value of like the Dark Crystal's practical side of like puppetry and
yeah,
set design and like these really immersive environments that they made, and they stuck to it, and they made that a part of the newer generation one. They didn't change anything, they just kind of did more, and
yeah.
it's like that works so well. It works well, and it's good that you call it Lord of the Rings. I'm embarrassed that I didn't consider that in my like Star Wars Episode 1, Lord of the Rings. The Fellowship was like one of those pillars that was like a perfect like seamless hybrid of like the two that just
Yeah,
there's a but it's funny, there's like I think there's a texture to the digital film or digital cameras versus capturing stuff on film and how they used to composite.
hmm,
Like I look at Lord of the Rings and like the way that that compositing was done back then, when I believe they captured on film, and they're kind of compositing with that in mind. It's almost now that it's digital, it's like everything is so crisp and clean. It all kind of just blurs together, and
yeah,
you don't have as much emphasis. So I see your point on like the practical side is like when you do see something done practically, if it's a miniature or whatever, the amount of love put into that, it depends on who's involved and who's doing it. It really
right.
does. Like, and what their motivations are. Because if you think about, do you ever watch Disney Plus put out it was a documentary on ILM. I can't remember, Light and Magic, I think is what it was called.
Yeah, yeah,
They did it was like a 10-part series on ILM's start, and really
yeah,
how they changed the industry and what they were doing with practical effects. And it was like I look at that and I go, what's interesting is that in those days it had really never been done on that scale before, so they were
right,
being challenged to do something that hadn't been done. So the motivation or the incentive was really strong to deliver on. After that, then it's sort of like other companies and groups will form, and they want to do the same thing, but then that competition sort of like it takes away from the excitement, I think, at
right, for
times, because
sure.
then it just becomes like, okay, we just got to produce more of this, and they're trying to find shortcuts to get more of it out in less time. But what makes those things so good, especially in that era, is that it hadn't been done before, and the only challenge was to make something amazing, and for the sake of doing it and to prove
Yeah,
that you could.
yeah.
That's where the greatest things come from
Well, I
ultimately.
think I think that's in general, like across history, in the art world, is like what separates the really great artists, the ones that go down in history, like the Van Goghs and the Picassos, and the ones that really everyone knows, versus other people who were at the same time who maybe if you looked at it, you'd be like, oh, their painting looks better, but the really greats, the reason why they're great is because they come along and they do something that's never been done before. Like
Yeah,
that's really that's what sets apart a good artist from a great artist, is somebody who can like
totally.
do something that's never been done. And because like to just copy what somebody else already did, whatever it is, whether it's a painting style, whether it's a visual effect style, like, okay, very nice. Like you're just trying to ride off somebody else's coattails. But if you kind of go out there and trailblaze, like that's what really people see, and they're like, oh my god, I can't believe I can't believe I've never seen something like this before, and like that
Right.
really it sets it apart in a way that nothing else can.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely, it's true, and I think the the Renaissance and the or rather just the fine arts world itself is a great example of like it's there's only so many of us that have the patience and the I don't know, the mind to be able to deliver those things. It's like
yeah,
that's just a reality of it. Like I don't, I've never, rather I've evolved and grown to. I no longer kind of see myself as an artist as much as I used to. I like when I got started, I was really trying to be that artist, but I think that was the point that I was missing, that maturity that I was missing is like if you're trying to be the artist, then you're missing the point. Like you should just be pursuing, that uniqueness and that offering that you want to bring something to the table and simply do that because you want to do it.
yeah,
And regardless of what the outcome is, if you're thinking about the outcome and like, oh, I'm doing it because I want this label or I want to be an artist, then you'll end up not delivering on that because your motivations are skewed. Like you're not
right,
necessarily doing it for the right reasons,
right,
and it takes time to get there. But some people just have this; they just have so much to give or offer. Those unique people, and they shine through in every field of art. And not always are they appreciated as much as they should be,
yeah,
sadly, because the superficial nature of things kind of comes into play and overshadows stuff. But what's real is real, and the
yeah,
ones that understand it, they know it and they see it.
yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, that's just maybe there's a question I wanted to ask you. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. This is about you in your personal career. Um, do you feel where you're at now, and kind of like where you've been throughout your career? Do you feel that you are more of an artist or more of a, or whatever? I don't know if I use the word artist, but whatever. Like, do you feel like you're doing more art or more like development? Because I feel like a lot of your career has been kind of like in tech development, like with Maxon
Yep.
or Pixelogic at the time, and like you've been doing a lot of the kind of like I don't know, I guess the UX UI sort of side of things. Um,
I've been largely my career into product development. It started, I started off as a character artist. That was what I was kind of defining myself as, or more of a 3D artist generalist is really what I was. I was
yeah,
kind of using my skills and knowledge for all kinds of random things, but all I was ever focusing my personal energy on was sculpting and modeling. Digital sculpture was kind of the thing that I loved the most, just because that's where my artist side really comes out, like me sitting in my room, like, speaking of Lord of the Rings, like that's all I was doing when I was, before I was introduced to 3D. It's like I had my big drawing table, I'd throw Lord of the Rings on, and I had all my Drew Struzan posters around, and like, and I loved his style of art, and I would just like, try to sketch and make
yeah,
stuff. And I loved, I never, like, I would just get lost, like hours and days would go away. And I loved the feeling of just being in that mode of just, doing stuff and practicing. But I mean, that's art. That is artistic. But it was, as you mentioned, like sort of just like copying or following. There's a point in your career when you really become an artist where you aren't following anymore, and where you're actually leading, and you have an understanding of a certain number of things where you can use that information and then apply it in a way that's unique and different. I never really got there. I was always, and that's why I don't see myself as an artist, because when I took that job with Pixelogic and I started working at ZBrush, I was doing camera work, and I was just listening to artists talk about their work and all the movies and games that they worked on, and helping basically facilitate ZBrush, the tool that they use to make those things. And I think pretty early on I started realizing that I'm not really gonna be. I was planning on being a character artist at, I wanted to get a character designer job at, fill in the blank game company or film
Right.
company. That was kind of my motivation. But when I got the ZBrush gig, I started seeing it from the inside, and I realized that, what, I don't know if I have the mind for that. I'm
Hmm.
too technical and like regimented. Maybe I'm not as free as I need to be in order to get there. And I just decided not to go that way. And I wanted to be more of a supporter of that. So I've always been a modeler and a designer, and I've done all kinds of things. But I eventually became an educator and a developer first.
Mm.
And that's really how I've seen myself for probably the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, because
Um,
for as long
you
as
know,
I've known you, I've only seen kind of the developer side of you, and
yeah.
I've seen you, and like we did that demo that time, and like I've definitely seen you in action. But it's funny because like when I think of you kind of as a developer before like a designer, But
Yep. Well,
yeah,
that's good. That makes me happy because it's painful to be trapped in that place. At least for me, it was like to be trapped in the place between artist and like what people see you as versus what you feel that you are.
mm,
Um, we all want to be seen for who we feel, what we feel on the inside, but we don't always, like a lot of people I notice don't achieve that, and they don't put enough emphasis on that, at least in the early phase of their career, because it's just you're trying to force it to happen,
yeah,
and that can get in the way of like enlightenment of like who you are and knowing yourself and following the thing that's going to fulfill you the most, and you have to kind of figure that out. And so I'm happy to hear that, because for a long time I was wanting everybody to see me as an artist, and I realized that like I need to stop doing that. Like it's
mm,
just, and I've blossomed because of that, and I've become a better, that was when I started, once I transitioned into that, and eventually I went from interactive media director. That was my title with ZBrush for the first 3 or 4 years. I was their media director. I was facilitating all their education, the classroom content, helping. I was working with artists to formulate courses and training content to learn ZBrush. I started teaching ZBrush at different colleges and online schools, and eventually at Art Center College in Pasadena, which is still where I've been on hiatus with them for a while. But I've worked with a lot of great education institutions, and I started finding value in myself as a teacher.
mm,
My I guess inability to deliver on the artist side was a blessing, because it gave me an insight that I can share with students, that things that I missed I can share with younger people
yeah,
before they make those same mistakes, because time is precious. You
right,
don't want to be figuring that out at mid 30s, as opposed to right out of college, where you can go right in and like
right.
really blossom and like find yourself early on.
Yeah. So I'm curious, just to circle back, like you were talking about this idea about how you perceive yourself versus how you want others just to perceive you, and kind of trying to force that. Can you kind of like expand on that a little bit more, like for people listening, for myself, like how do you kind of stop stop yourself from trying to force yourself to be something you're not, if you will, or to be perceived as something you're not, and to just kind of focus in on what you are, and really dive into that and develop that.
Mm, it's a good question. It For me, it was a long, arduous process of like denial for a while. It's sort of like, I remember I was really fortunate with ZBrush over the years. It kind of happened naturally where, you know, I, sometimes you have to kind of like, you have to reach a place where you can be more humble. And I was forced into this because I was surrounded by the best 3D artists in the world, like ZBrush artists specifically.
Yeah.
I was talented. I do have a natural aptitude for sculpting, but I struggled with, and I understood anatomy very well. I could sculpt. I remember doing John Brown's clay sculpting class at Noman Workshop, and um, you know, trying to sculpt a boxing figure, and I was focusing all my energy on anatomy, anatomy, anatomy. Like, you got to get the muscles, you got to have the structure right, you got to make sure everything is proportionally correct, and all of that. But you can get so caught up in that stuff, which a lot of digital artists do. You end up not feeling good about your work afterwards, because the appreciation that you're expecting. I think everybody that makes art one way, in one form or another, is looking for some sort of like respect or appreciation from it. And I would always get it on a surface level. It's like, oh, you're a ZBrush guy, you must know so much. People would, praise the stuff that I do and, give me prompts, but I never felt I never felt good about it. And that's the point that I fixated on. And what
Mm.
led me to realizing this is that, well, why don't, like, you have to ask yourself the question first, like, if you're not feeling good or confident about what you're doing, why not? And why don't you care about that? You know, why bash your head against the wall and try to like brute force that by just doing more sculpts and spending 6 months on the same character model to perfect it and make it absolutely perfect so people will appreciate it and see it for what you hope that they will see it as opposed to just going, well, I'm not that yet. You know,
Right.
there's an arrogance that comes into play with art in that, like, especially with the industry, because our industry is like, I guess, to kind of go back to, you know, me being surrounded by so many talented artists, would just have these incredible conversations and be so inspired, and it improved my artwork just by being surrounded by those people. But I noticed the difference between what they were doing and what I was doing, and how fast they were doing it versus how slow I was doing mine.
Yeah.
And I think I just started asking that question, and I said, well, if I'm not, you know, satisfied or fulfilled, then it's my job to figure out how to become more satisfied and fulfilled in that area. Sometimes it means you have to, you know, let something go before you can move forward. You know, you
Yeah.
can't always, like, you can't have it all the
Right.
time, you know.
Right.
And that I think was the catalyst for me, and it just kind of naturally happened after that. And I just naturally started looking at the things that, well, what am I fulfilled by? What makes me feel fulfilled at the end of the day, where I can check in and check out? Because I had so much anxiety and stress of just like, well, I got to keep working. Nope, but like, can't go do those things, can't enjoy my life. I just got to sit and sculpt and model and keep practicing until hopefully it'll happen. And that work ethic is what gets people there. That's a good quality to have, but it's a double-edged sword, because
Right.
it you know, it can nip you if you don't, you know, pay attention to that stuff. I
Right.
don't know if that explains it. I could elaborate more.
No, that's great. So that's kind of what motivated you to move more into like the education space.
Definitely, for me, and it was also practically a career decision. It was like, well, the visual effects industry was, the bubble has been, it kind of continued to expand, but it kind of reached its capacity where, you know, I've watched, you asked earlier about the industry changing in 20 years. I watched it go from, you know, to a lead character artist position, or character designer roles were highly sought after. And it took a very special, you know, type of person to get there. Then all of a sudden, 5, 10 years later, everybody is doing it, and people are coming out of,
Right.
like, people aren't even necessarily going to universities to get these gigs, and they're just like going right into getting these jobs. And you know, this is no, I'm just being pragmatic about this in an observation, but it's just, that's how things go. It's like, it was a specialty thing, and that's what made me excited about it. I wanted to be a part of something very exclusive. And then all of a sudden, when your industry becomes like more commonplace and it's easier, the entry to get in is easier now. You're now going up against, you know, the clock and the number of people that are trying to do the same thing as you.
Right.
And there's always somebody that's going to be better than you at that thing. So
Right.
for me, it maybe this is just ego, but it was like, if I can't be the best, I'm okay with that. I've learned to embrace that. And I think if anything, it gives me motivation to help others achieve their goals if they do want to reach that. And that fulfills me the most, I think, more
Yeah.
than anything else.
Yeah. That's really cool. I find it really interesting that like so many artists, you know, whatever the discipline is, but I've noticed kind of a trend that a lot of people start off their careers doing the grind, doing whatever it is, animation, 3D, whatever that they're doing, and they all seem to kind of like eventually end up in education. You know, like they
Yeah.
all kind of they all, it all like all roads lead to educating others, and I don't know. It's an interesting observation that like I don't know. Maybe it's just like you want to give back, or I don't know what the like underlying motivation is, but it's such a recurring theme. Like
It
you look
is.
around nowadays, like the industry nowadays, like all the best artists and then all the biggest names in the industry are teaching in some form or another, whether they have like online mentorships or teaching at art center or whatever it is. Like it's I don't know. It's a interesting like
Yeah,
phenomenon.
well, it's the age old saying, like, those that can't do teach, you know, that people say it. And I used to really, it used to bug me so much, because it was just an insecurity more than anything else. Like, I didn't want to be seen as
Right.
that. And because I was like, well, I can do just as good as everybody else. Like, if I really wanted to get there, I know I could. That
Right.
was, you know, my mentality. And I think it's a mentality for a lot of folks, but that's the enlightened state of like achieving that humbleness and mindfulness and gratefulness of just like, okay, you have to step back and go, like, is that really the case? Like I think it's more so that it's not that you can't do, it's just that there's only so much room and space for those positions and those, those great figureheads that are leading in any area. It's not just art, it's everything. It's
Yeah.
every aspect of our lives and how we apply ourselves. And when you're doing something that's highly competitive, that's just, think about it as, professional sports or,
Right.
entertainment, acting, fill in the blank. It's all the same. There's only so much space. And so a lot of folks, if you get to that point where you realize it's like, some people just kind of stop fighting for that position anymore. And the only available options are to teach. It's like, well, I've committed my life to studying these things, and I can't just like quit this and like
Right.
go work a regular retail job or whatever. I'd lose my mind. So,
Right.
but I can teach, I can share this information. And so a lot of people do. And, that's a good thing and a bad thing, or rather, I think it presents challenges in that, like, all things move forward, whether we like it or not. But, the volume of education is a blessing, because that's what helped facilitate all of these digital artists that have now been able to get into this world. For me, it was like I had to go to university and I had to kind of learn from professionals that had done this before. And then YouTube started blowing up. Like when I was at ZBrush, when I actually became a true developer, that was when we started doing the most exciting things at ZBrush. It was, we built ZBrush Live, which was our streaming platform. I was hosting the ZBrush podcast and sitting with some of the best 3D artists and sculptors in the world, talking about, their work and what motivated them, just like we're talking about that stuff here. And then in that, all around us, the whole industry was exploding with this stuff. Streaming
Yeah.
came into play. You get Twitch, YouTube exploded. And now it's just, there's so much. And a lot of people are disheartened, I think, by that. I think it makes us a little pessimistic about things. And it's just like, oh, okay, well, it's not as fun anymore. But what I don't think people realize is, like, now that this is so established and there's so many people doing it, I think that this is a perfect environment for whatever the next phase is going to be. Like for me, my era was ZBrush, at least in the 3D arts world. ZBrush Central used to be the biggest place to go. I remember like wanting so badly to do a piece and get on top row, and then I eventually got a job there, which means I couldn't get on top row even if I did do something great. But I got put on top row for training stuff. I got to be there as like, because I was part of the company, but I never achieved that thing. But then ArtStation came out, and then the art visibility became so oversaturated, it devalues all those little things that we used to just, those UGMs that I used to be a part of at Noman, where it was like 200 people in a room, and it's like a small group of people doing this thing that they loved, and the passion was so strong, it was exciting. And it changed, but I think it's natural and normal for it to have changed, and it only makes sense that you excited all these people wanted to do what you were doing. And now you've got, instead of 100,000 people, you've got 1 million people doing it.
Right.
So there's that, but who knows what the next thing's going to be? I think VR and AR and all these new spaces and worlds and ways to deliver content, the AAA console platforming experience is, it needs to change. It definitely is like the profit has been taking over the creative, groundbreaking stuff that used to be there, and now we don't see it as much anymore. Or we do, we don't appreciate it because it's like the same as the last one that came out 5 years ago.
But there's not a whole lot, and just in general, it's not only just in gaming. I think it's across the industry. Like we were saying before, it's there's not a lot of great things coming out right now. There's a lot of mediocre and good things, not a lot of great things, and it's unfortunate. It really requires like something or someone to come and like really shake up the industry. Like obviously there's no way to know what that's going to look like until it happens, but it'll be interesting to see kind of over the next, I'd say like 5 years or so. I think we're going to see a lot of changes. Definitely. And like we could sit here and speculate as to like what those changes are going to look like, but there's no way to know. It's like
totally.
It's like I one time heard this thing about with sci-fi in general, like sci-fi stories, right? How like sci-fi stories always kind of are one of two things. Either it's like the worst case scenario or best case scenario. Yeah. And the it's always there's these big speculations and these big ideas about what's going to be, and the reality kind of ends up somewhere in between the two.
Right.
Like the utopian vision and the dystopian vision, and like reality, and that, first of all, it kind of exists somewhere in between the two, and then also technologies come along that were totally unthinkable to the
Yeah.
people. You look at some of the classic sci-fi authors, and you think to yourself, like, how'd you not think of the internet or smartphones or like these things
Yeah.
that we take for granted now, but like, but that's so same thing with any industry, and with this, with our industry as well, like it's impossible to know what it's going to look like, but
True.
um
But it's a good point, though. It's true. It's like all those things, those ideas, everything you put out into the universe facilitates what, it in some small way, we make it a reality, and
yeah,
that's a really good thing. And I think the monotony of content and all the stuff is really just a byproduct of capitalism and all these other things. And I'm not even saying that that's a bad thing. Because I don't see it as such. That's what makes the world go around for most of us, and what kind of pushes us forward. That's a good thing, but it can be, a tool that's wielded incorrectly to the point
right,
where, it kind of makes our lives a little bit more bland and boring, where it's just not
right,
as exciting for the artist, because it's like, well, where's the room? What am I doing with my time and all this stuff? I remember having that feeling of just kind of like lackluster excitement, and partially it was because I was so exposed to so many tremendous artists and content and stuff for 15 years. I was a developer with ZBrush for 10 years, and ultimately, a developer has started, like I said, the sort of
yeah,
janitor interactive media to developer, half and half. And but being surrounded by that changed me. It took away some of the excitement. It's sort of like never meet your heroes is a real thing, because when you reach that space or that place, it takes away from your drive, to
mm,
keep things small. If you really want to like do some unique work and bring something new to the table, you shouldn't I feel like it benefits you to stay away from being exposed to too much stuff, because it's only natural for that stuff to like feed into your brain and kind of make you feel like, that's what you have to do. And a lot of
yeah,
people do that. And a lot of people do amazing stuff. I mean, like the ZBrush Centrals of the world, the Art Station, there's so much great work being done out there comparatively to what it used to be. I think the quality bar has gone up tremendously, in terms of just like amount of people that can do amazing stuff. But how
right,
they do it used to be like there was we had a chip on our shoulder, back in the day. The practical effects world even more so. They didn't like digital because it's, instead of you sculpting a figure out of clay and doing all these incredible things and having this tremendous understanding of the fundamentals of design and art and all of these things, people are getting there in a fraction of the time. People didn't like ZBrush when it came out,
yeah,
the digital, they trash talked it, and it's like, oh, you're just a, vertex pusher, you're a pixel pusher, you're not actually an artist. But it became an art form in its own way. And that's when I was coming up, and I really believe that it evolved into something that is a true art form, and it's just a different way of doing things. Like
yeah,
what 50 people used to be able to do, now a few people can do.
right,
With the right skill sets, you combine those minds and you bring something to the table, you can do something really incredible. But the point is, what are you going to do with it? Are you
yeah,
just going to make another, 5-minute short that's like the same subject matter and theme and stylistically as, something else that you saw? It's what we see a lot of. And
yeah,
that's, I feel like, a rite of passage that every person should do and is going to do. I'm not saying that, I don't mean to diss that by any means. I think it's just natural. But there's another place to elevate to after that, to learn from and go, okay, like I've had my time while doing that stuff. Now I need to evolve and grow, and I need to think more intentionally about what I'm going to deliver. And, if it isn't unique, it doesn't have to always be unique. You don't have to be the best at anything. Like if you just enjoy doing it, forget what I'm saying. Like just,
right,
the
right,
enjoyment part of the process is everyone's right. And I've been subject to that myself, and I've lived, my creative life like that for a long time. But now I see it differently, where there's so much room for opportunity. All you need to do is step back and just take a big wide look at everything
yeah,
and go, what aren't we thinking of? As you
yeah,
say, like, why didn't you think about smartphones and
yeah,
tablets and all these other things? Like, there's always room for growth.
right. And it's hard also, like, as somebody, who's whatever you're doing, whatever kind of innovation it is that you're talking about, like it's difficult because whenever you walk outside of the lines, you're not going to get that recognition. And I think in today's day and age, more so than ever before, right, with like the whole attention economy as they call it, like so many people want to do the thing that's going to get them viral, want to do the thing that's going to get them,
Yeah.
millions of views. And so it's like, okay, so I got to do whatever the trend is, right? A lot of these social media platforms are built around, pushing whatever the trend is, like that's what they're going to push more of. And so, it kind of like, it pushes people towards homogeny of like, well, everybody else is doing, this TikTok dance, so I have to do it too. And
Exactly.
it makes it much more difficult to like take that risk and do something different that people aren't doing, and to like really, not even step out of your comfort zone, but like just try new things, and try
Yeah.
things that haven't been done before, because
Sure.
like that's where growth happens, and so,
Totally.
and like we like circling back, like we talking about, like with the, like the good versus great artists, but then, unfortunately, a lot of the great artists don't get recognized in their lifetime for that very reason, because they're
Right.
doing something that's unconventional, and everyone's like, "What's this guy doing?" And then, they die, and people look back and they're like, "Oh my God!" Like, and then once everybody else starts doing it, my dad always has this line. He always says, "When my idea becomes your idea, you did something right." So
Yeah.
whenever,
It's a good line. It's great.
yeah,
It's true.
yeah.
It's
So it's
very
like
true.
once everybody else
Well,
starts copying, it's like, oh wait a second, like why do we do that to start with, But it's
right. Well, and I think the only lesson to learn from that is like, seek to know where you fit in that place, because
yeah,
both should exist and will always coexist together.
right,
But if you want true fulfillment as an artist, just know which one you are and
right,
appreciate the part that you are and why you're doing it. If you're, if you are just doing it because you enjoy it, and you're just doing the same, TikTok dance, whatever, like no hate, no
yeah,
diss. Like I respect that as much as I respect the person that's trying to be groundbreaking and bring something new to the table. But I think just for all of us to coexist in harmony, the truth is that it's frustrating when you're surrounded by people who are just doing a lot of the same stuff, and they're
yeah,
selling themselves as like, well, I'm like, what I'm doing is so special and so important. It's like, well, you know, not everybody agrees,
right,
and it would just be better if we all can kind of like, understand that sort of hierarchy, and that it's not even a hierarchy. It's more of just like, they're all kind of in the same level as far as I'm
yeah,
concerned. It's like,
yeah,
there's the things that keep things moving forward, and those that do push the bar, and the ones that push the bar sacrifice more than the ones that don't.
yeah,
And that's just the reality. We have to pay respect to those people that are that creative and do, have the courage to go against the grain, because it doesn't always, I think a lot of them don't get recognized because there's sort of just like a natural order to like how the social structure of just like, there's a tribalistic nature to humanity. We kind
right,
of like, you start to set
absolutely,
rules for what's good and what's not good. And it's like, if it goes past that, it's like, well, that's not great, but it might actually be really great. You
right,
just don't know. You
right,
can't see outside of yourself sometimes to really get it.
yeah. I was having this conversation with like a teacher slash mentor of mine, and I don't remember the whole context, but there's one thing that he said to me that like really like stuck with me to this day. And like, again, I forget all the context. We're talking about like, recognition, and this kind of like this same sort of topic. And he said to me something to the degree of like, just decide which group you want to be recognized in, right? Because like you're
Yeah.
saying, like, we are very tribal by nature, and so, what one group might recognize you for and be like, wow, that's great. Another group might be like, what the hell is that guy doing, and why is he doing that, and that's terrible, and so like,
Right.
you kind of have to make the conscious decision of like, who am I trying to impress, for lack of a better word, like, who are the people that I want to, you know yeah, impress, I guess, wherever you get that recognition from, because you're not going to please everybody ever.
Right.
You're never going to do something that everybody loves and everybody's like, wow, this is perfect. So you gotta have to kind of like pick your lane almost and be like, no, like this is what I'm going to do. And
Yeah.
if you like it, great. If you don't like it, go find somebody else who's doing what you like. And like
Absolutely.
a lot of people
Absolutely.
are uncomfortable with that.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, well, it's yeah, and I don't, that's like deep psychology, and like, maybe the flaws in man, when it comes down to it, like I think the it's ultimately the thing that we're challenged to do most in our lives is to master that part of ourselves in order to, achieve this like balance and like, satisfaction
Yeah.
of in things, and to be good to other people and good to ourselves and all of that. But it's like you're just always chasing this demon or this dragon that you're trying to catch. And, that's a good thing. It's like I think we always, the best humans seem to always, to not be too comfortable is like one of those rules. In the top 10 rules you need, it's like you don't want to be too comfortable. If you really, have something to give and you want to bring something new, being comfortable and safe is not a good environment.
Right.
You need to be challenged, and you need to be humble in that sense. Like a lot of people who don't have fundamentals, myself included. Like for a long time, I was trying to be one of those people, but I never had like the true fundamental understanding of some of the core aspects in art and creation that I needed to be able to say I'm a true leader and teacher. You need to be a student more often than not.
Yeah.
And taking that approach gets you really far, and will get you to the top in ways that you can't imagine. But you have to do it, humbly and respectfully for
Right.
sometimes a long time before it
Right.
really sets in.
Yeah. And it's not comfortable, but like that's part of the process. Like
Hmm.
that's where the growth really comes from.
Truly, absolutely.
I'm really curious to ask. I kind of changing gears just a little bit. I mean,
Sure.
it's still kind of on the same topic, but this is just out of curiosity. How did you get your job at Art Center? Because that's a pretty prestigious institute.
It is. It was mostly due to my place in the industry, and
Hmm.
as a developer, you definitely gain an edge by being a part of the team. Like for ZBrush particularly, I was teaching, the classes that I teach there have been character design, um, character design for production. So specifically designing assets for, animation production, not necessarily getting into rigging and all of that, but fundamental modeling, topology, UVs, all the essential stuff to, get the assets built. Intro to ZBrush, just getting people into digital sculpting just on a basic level.
Mm.
How do you transition into that? And I more recently, in the last 5 to 6 years, have transitioned into product design, which is more like soft goods, hard goods. ZBrush has always been known as like sculpting and modeling for characters and creatures and environments, but
Yeah.
it's a tremendous modeling tool for all kinds of things. I have like one of my students' pieces in the back, the character kind of standing there in motion.
Oh, nice.
Toys and stuff that you're interested in, toys and rapid prototyping and all of that.
Yeah.
That's a lot of what I've been teaching more recently, and I got in mainly because I was the developer at ZBrush, and my understanding of the tool itself is more than most. Even though I'm not necessarily like at the forefront of a leader and as a designer for any number of companies, or like some of the other teachers there are, they're full time artists and modelers
Yeah.
and designers and all of that. They've paid their dues.
Yeah.
But for me, it was really just being on the inside gave me an edge, and I was very grateful for that opportunity, to be able to join them. And thankfully, it went very well. I was there on a trial basis at the very beginning, and I had great success with my students, mainly just because I kind of took that backseat approach. I stopped trying to be, I'm not going to pretend like I'm, a big, ILM character designer coming to Art Center to teach you how to design characters for ILM. I was more about, I want to show you the entire breadth of this thing so you can see all the possible ways that you can use it. And I would commit a lot of my time and energy to students individually. It's
Hmm.
partially why I was able to excel at Art Center, and I love the student body, and the environment there is fantastic, and it was a good place for me to be. It took many
Yeah.
years to get there. I was at LA Film School before, and with some other online institutions, and so yeah.
Yeah. How important do you think it is, like, in today's day and age, like with YouTube and with all the resources and like everything we've been talking about, how important do you think it is nowadays to, like, for a person to go to an art center or one of these institutions, that kind of have the name recognition, on top of everything you learn, obviously.
I personally feel it's monumentally important. I think the mentorship aspect of being in a more focused state, of especially when it comes to art, if you really want to be able to achieve that humble, enlightened state, and kind of be able to be the most efficient person as well, you kind of have to put yourself in that environment where you're surrounded by a group of people that are pursuing something. Like the
Mm.
social aspect is really
Hmm.
important. And particularly at a place like Art Center, they put an emphasis on, the quality of instructors and instructors that come from very unique places that really know what they're talking about and where they come from that world. That's really important. It's partially why, when I left, I was like on track to go to Michigan State and study fine arts. I decided that I didn't want to continue going down that path there, mainly just because I felt like I'm not going to be surrounded by people that are working in the environment in the industries that I specifically want to go to. And I learned that firsthand, that it benefited me. I didn't necessarily go to the best animation school in the world. It was a fast track program. It was 2 years, very intense, 6 hour labs, 6 hour lecture and lab times, like stayed at, in the labs until 6 in the morning. Like I was surrounded by a small group of people, and we all fed off of each other. And those other students, that are the prestigiousness of that, elevates you to a better place where you have more respect for a certain number of things that I think is important.
Mm.
Now, to go out to the YouTube side of things and the self-learning, I've also been a big self-learner. I learned a tremendous amount from the institutions, and I observed that a place like Art Center College and others are still the best places to go. But you never stop doing these things in your own way too. You have to apply yourself in your own space as well, and that's where YouTube and these other things really become super powerful. But I caution anybody against like only learning through, like self-learning through YouTube and other places, because, you're piecemealing a lot of information that is uh, instinctually and selectively being fed to you to get to the point. Like the content now is all about quick, fast, get the likes. People are these are people's jobs now, to run a YouTube channel and to be a
Right.
personality. And some are tremendous. There's some great ZBrush artists out there that are like, they teach as good as you would get at Art Center and other places. They really are that good. But what you miss out on is all the other stuff that happens when the camera's not being
Right.
recorded. And
Right.
that's what you miss out on by not going to an institution. That I just think it makes you a more whole person and a whole artist when you get that and you're challenged by those other people. Because without it, you're just always going to be missing something, and you're always going to have a chip on your shoulder, I think, because of it. Your confidence won't be there, because there's a validity that comes to training with the best. It's like, I'm trying to think of some good artists that do this really well. Some will come to me, but
Which
I've
aspect
I've listened
specifically?
I've listened to artists like when I was doing the ZBrush podcast. I've had this conversation a number of times, and some of those artists, studied at like fine arts schools in Europe and other places, and
Yeah.
they have such a way of understanding things. Their confidence as an artist is so much stronger, and because they were challenged by some of the best people in the world, and they weren't necessarily as gratified, they didn't get that gratification that you get from like following a YouTube video and making a thing. You follow some steps and you make a thing, you feel good, but you don't necessarily know after that how to go and reapply it again. And
Yeah.
I think it's instinctually like a part of us to go, well, I don't have to do that, because I can save this YouTube video in a playlist, and if I ever need to go back and do it again, I'll just watch that video.
Right.
But you know we're
Right.
humans. We need to fill that cup with this information that becomes a part of us and then becomes second nature. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's just the best way to do it.
It's really interesting that you say that, because like I just like when you said that about like these people who go to like the European schools and whatnot. Like just I can think of a few examples off the top of my head. Like most recently, like there's a guy Joseph Mena. I met him through Paul
That's who I was trying to recall. Joe Mena studied at a fine arts
in
Russian
Germany,
institute.
I think, or Russian,
It was
and
Russian. It was really prestigious.
yeah, and Paul was doing like he had like an online course for a little while, and that's why like I learned 3D printing actually was from him, and so
Okay.
he had Joseph Mena come on, and hopefully we're gonna get him on here also. But he had him come on as like as a guest speaker and to kind of lecture or whatever and talk about collectibles, because that's kind of his career, a big part of his career.
Yes.
But just like the way he talked about art was so different than what you hear from the whatever, for lack of a of a better term, like the kind of American ZBrush artist who kind of like,
Totally.
online artist, let's just say like that way, like,
Yeah.
and so that was one example. Another one, there's a guy who I grew up, he's my neighbor growing up, right down the street from us, a man by the name of Johnny Tozo, and he is a glassblower from Italy, from Murano, and so we were like, he was a family friend, like we knew him as our neighbor, and like just also the way he talked about his art was so different than like anybody else,
Yeah.
that I've met before, like just even like there's one story that sticks out to me. One time we were over at his house, and he had this beautiful chandelier in his dining room over his dining room table. It was these beautiful flowers and really, really nice. And my brother-in-law said to him, "Oh, how long did that take you to make?" And he gave some comment. This guy, he's got to be in his probably early 70s. At the time he was in his 60s. He said to him, whatever, 65 years. And my brother-in-law was like, "What?" And
Yep.
he's like, "You have to understand, like this piece is like this is a lifetime of work to be able to make something like this." And like,
Yeah.
and his stuff is really incredible. In fact, one time we were in Italy with my family, and we were like, we went to Murano, and seeing all the different glass blowing, and like on one of the buildings was like his family, what do you call it, not sigil, what's the term, like the
Like crest.
yeah. And so like we asked like one of the people, like, "Oh, like Toza, whatever." He's like, "Oh, that's like our rival, whatever." But it's like apparently it's like it's like this family of Italian glassblowers, and it's just it's very interesting how different these people approach the art. Like it's
Yeah.
really it's a very different mentality and attitude. And then just
Absolutely.
the third example I was thinking of, there's a guy who's been at Lightbox for a number of years. Unfortunately, I can't remember his name right now. Afterwards, I'll look it up because I took a photo of his stuff. He's also an Italian guy, and he makes maquettes. That's like his thing. He's a
Okay.
sculptor, and he makes these maquettes. And he's worked, done it for Disney and Pixar and all the different companies. And his work is just incredible. I mean, and he's so at Lightbox, he's there I think every year, and he has them all, a bunch of them for sale, and his work is just gorgeous. And I like I sat down, I was just talking to him for a few minutes, just to, like kind of pick his brain. And yeah, there's it's like a different breed almost when you talk to these
Totally.
people.
Those people are the most inspiring to talk to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Or
Yeah.
even this guy like I spoke to the other day, this Aiden Hines, when I was telling you he does the foam sculptures. I mean he's been doing it for 30 plus years, and like also just even like he didn't have the same kind of formal training, as in the same way as these other guys do, but even him, like just listening to his story and his journey and his outlook on art, and he went to an art school, and but it's I don't know if it comes with age or if it comes with where you learn, but these people have a very different attitude towards it,
Yeah.
and I wonder if it's like again, I think maybe it's just an age thing. Like maybe like when you're young, you're so focused on like, making money and gaining the recognition, and like you're saying from the beginning, kind of how you perceive yourself versus how you want others to perceive you, and just with time
Yeah.
and maturity, you kind of realize like why you're doing it, and what the
Absolutely.
real important aspects of it are.
Absolutely. And it's ultimately, I think with them, I think it's a combination of both. It can happen with age, like that, the wisdom. If you're introspective enough, eventually you'll kind of figure that out one way or the other. But you can get kind of led astray and follow the wrong paths for a long time of just pursuing what do I get from this thing when I do it, And I think that bringing up the American mindset, that's just kind of how it is in this country when it comes to everything, and we're kind of poisoned by that when it comes to art and entertainment. It's why I don't even want to consider, I don't think of myself as an artist anymore, mainly just because it just feels disrespectful to the ones that are
Mm.
the Joe Mendes of the world that studied at like very refined institutes where it was very personal and special and meaningful. And there's sort of a rite of passage that you're being passed a torch to do something that's really special that it's not even necessarily it's not breaking into new ground per se, but it's studying something that has kind of become this refined thing that you're now carrying on to the next generation. And Joe Mena is
Yeah.
really a fantastic example, because he, it was a fine arts university, and it was about sculpture and like doing things as they did, thousands of years ago,
Yeah.
and like kind of carrying on this legacy. And then now he pushed that into his comic book art style, and
Yeah.
characters for comic books that are 3D, but he still applies the same techniques to this
Yeah.
stuff that is very cool. Like that, although it I think some might turn there might be ego. They might, say that that's not as good as it was, say, 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago. But ultimately, it's still there and it's present. And I think that
Yeah.
there's like that's I respect that more than, you know, just doing stuff for how many YouTube likes you get, or
Right.
how many what attention you get from that thing. It's like there's more meaning to it in
Yeah.
that regard.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So just there's a kind of a question I've been trying to ask my guests, just to try and to bring it a little more like I don't know, not relatable, but it's something for people, because I think a lot of people look at people who have big careers and who are successful in the industry, and they kind of think to themselves like, like, oh man, like that guy's perfect and he never made a mistake. Can you talk about some of the failures in your career? Sometimes that things
Mm.
didn't work out the way you maybe wanted them to, or even times that you were really proud of something, but then it ended up flopping.
Mm. Gosh, I mean, pretty much everything. But I think it's literally everything. Like, very rarely do I ever feel like fulfilled by the stuff that I make or that I've done. Um, Mostly just because it's that drive or desire to want to do more is like what I think it's that mindset is what makes you an artist. I think more than anything else. I think those people end up gravitating towards art because it's a perfect outlet for it. It's like you know you, I can't tell you how many models I did. I remember like having a really great. I did a sculpture of Cable from the Marvel Comics universe like a while back, and more than a while back. It was like my prized possession in college when it was like on my demo reel, and everybody like at the time it was like the best character model in the group of like all the students that had been around for the last 3 or 4 years, and everybody was hyping it up, and I was just working on it for months and months and months, and then like redoing it and redoing it, and like never really finished it. Like I never finished it. And I can't tell you, I have hard drives full of hundreds, probably thousands of models and sculpts of things that I never finished. And I was always just like, you know, I just kind of, I get bored with it. I never finished that last 10%.
Yeah.
And those failures ultimately, it's hard to even look at those as failures anymore. Those are great practice beds for what I could probably apply myself to do now after, I've taken quite a bit of time off from digital artwork these days, and I've put more emphasis towards product development and just focusing on my career and being an educator and all of that. But all those failures of just like never getting that thing to where I wanted it to go, definitely taught me this lesson of like being okay with that is an important thing. You have to learn to like embrace that part and know when to stop, and knowing when to push yourself. But that specific character model was one of those things for me, because it was like my prized possession. And I remember actually after graduation, I went home to visit family, and my computer and my hard drive, everything got stolen from I left it at my sister's place, and somebody broke into their house and actually stole all this stuff that was like the most valuable stuff to me at the time,
Yeah.
by far.
Yeah.
I lost it all and had to start over, and it was like, whoa, like that feeling of like just horrible rock bottom, like what am I going to do, these things are so important, but nothing actually really happened. It was like I was totally fine to keep going and start over again and try to like, okay, like there's nothing wrong with doing something again, there's nothing wrong with starting over from a fresh perspective. That's definitely one of those things that sticks in my mind that has definitely helped with modeling, and that being able to let go while you're working on stuff, not being controlled by the work, but controlling it, is one of those things that's really hard, a lesson to learn,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. It's really well said. So then on the flip side, on the flip side of the same coin, how do you define success? Like what to you is the definition of success?
Oh, I think the underlying theme for me this whole conversation is that I feel personally that success really lies in kind of mastering oneself and knowing one's place in whatever medium or thing that you're involved in. Whatever you apply yourself to, like to be able to, to have your eyes really open, to be observant and self-aware and grow and get into a position where you realize that you're always going to be growing and changing. You're never going to reach that thing, especially as an artist, that you feel you're supposed to be. Because when you get there, you actually realize that you never needed that to begin with, and it frees you up to really appreciate and enjoy what you do, as opposed to kind of being led by that thing always and never being fully in control of yourself. And I don't necessarily think like true happiness is a real thing. I don't know if happy is a thing that we all are ever going to achieve. We talk about wanting to be happy with our stuff, but it's like I don't think we're supposed to. I don't think it's in our nature to be happy. We always, once you achieve that gratification, the temporary satisfaction from a thing that you did, you immediately want to go do something else, right?
Yeah.
You always want to go make another piece, or you're looking for that next thing, and that's the point. Is like it's about appreciating that part more than it is about reaching a certain milestone.
Right.
Or for me it was always like I wanted that milestone to have sort of a stamp of approval that I am somehow in the industry one way or another. I wanted to be accounted as part of that, and I wanted it so badly that I would do anything to get there. I was willing to do any amount of work or anything that was asked. I was down to do it. But ultimately when you get there, it doesn't really feel any different, and then you kind of
Right.
look back and you go like, what was the point of all that? Like I thought there was going to be this satisfaction at the end that was going to fulfill me. And this is one of those age old sayings, but it's like, that's not really what it's about. And so I think that's the most important thing. And it comes down to being self-aware about what motivates you, what you actually want to do versus what you feel like you're supposed to do. Those are two different things sometimes. I think often they're two different things and we don't
Yeah.
even realize it.
Yeah. Well, on that note, that's a great place to wrap it up. That was
Sure.
very well said. Thank you so much for your time. Where can people find you online and where you're at?
Oh, well, I am on Instagram. You can find me at Saul Blair. I'm on LinkedIn as well, Solomon Blair. You should be able to discover me. There's not many Solomon Blairs in at least that I've found. Solomon Napoleon Blair is actually my full name, so that's what I use a lot to find me on any socials. I do have Instagram. You can link to my art Instagram there. You can find me on ArtStation at Solomon Blair as well. I have a lot of I'm a tinkerer. I like to model and make stuff, and I've got all kinds of random things that I've done over the years that I share every once in a while. So you can find me in any of those places.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Mo. I appreciate the conversation as always.
Yeah, I appreciate your time.
I'll catch you next time.